The turkey was already on the table when I walked through my mother's front door and saw my ex-husband sitting in my grandfather's old chair. I stopped in the doorway. The cold November air was still on my coat. Stella was beside me, her small hand in mine, her eyes scanning the room for cousins she barely knew. She didn't notice the man with the gray tie sitting at the far end of the table, the man who had once told me I was too much for any decent person to love. My brother noticed me noticing. He raised his wine glass and smiled like he was watching something unfold that he'd been looking forward to all week. "Hey sis," he said, "glad you could make it." What none of them knew, not my brother, not my sister-in-law with her perfect braid and polite smile, not even my mother, who was already rushing toward me with outstretched arms, was that the house they were standing in had been paid for in part by me. The kitchen renovation with the marble backsplash, the new water heater, the back deck my father had been showing off since spring, my brother's truck in the driveway, the one he'd told me he saved up for himself. All of it existed because of money that had been quietly flowing from my company into their lives for 3 years, and not one of them had ever thought to ask where it came from. I smiled at my mother, squeezed her hand, and walked into the room. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house that looked fine from the outside. 2 stories, a magnolia tree in the front yard, a basketball hoop above the garage my brother used every day. Inside, the rules were different depending on who you were. My father ran things the way his father had, with a firm voice and a short memory for anything that contradicted what he already believed. He worked in insurance, and he was good at it, and he treated expertise the way some men treat money, as proof of moral worth. He was the expert on everything in our house. What we ate, what we watched, what we should want to become. My brother Cody was easy. He played sports, he was charming, he had friends. My father coached his teams and drove him to tournaments and sat in the front row at every game. When Cody was 17 and got a speeding ticket, my father laughed and said, "Boys will be boys." When I was 17 and placed first in the state science fair with a computer model I'd built in 6 months, my father looked at the ribbon and said, "That's nice, huh? But who's going to marry a girl who spends all her time with machines?" My mother was kind. She was also tired. She had learned long ago that smoothing things over was the fastest way to end an argument, and she had become very good at it. She would reach over and pat my hand and say, "Your father loves you in his own way," and I think she believed it. I think she still does. I was the one who didn't fit. I wasn't the athlete. I wasn't the easy one. I wasn't charming in the way my family understood charm. I was the girl who read programming books at the dinner tea table, and who had teachers pull my mother aside to say, "Your daughter is exceptional. You need to let her go somewhere, she'll be seen." One of those teachers changed everything. Mrs. Dupree ran the computer lab at my high school. She stayed late with me 3 days a week for 2 years, not because she was required to, but because she believed in something she saw that no one else in my life was bothering to look for. She wrote my recommendation for Georgia Tech. She called the financial aid office herself to make sure I knew about every scholarship I might be eligible for. When my acceptance letter came, I ran to show my father. He was in his recliner watching a game. "Georgia Tech," he said, not looking up, "that's far." "I know," I said, "that's the point." He turned the volume up. "My mother drove me to the bus station in August," she cried. "She said, 'Call us when you get settled. Don't forget to eat. Don't work so hard you forget to live.' I held her for a long time because I understood something she didn't. I wasn't planning to come back, not really. Not to the version of myself they had decided I was in that house. The first semester at Georgia Tech almost broke me. Everyone was brilliant, and everyone seemed to know it. I had spent my entire childhood in a house where my intelligence was treated as a social liability, and suddenly I was surrounded by people for whom it was simply a starting point. I went back to my dorm some nights and sat on the floor and thought, "You don't belong here." But I stayed. I stayed because I was more afraid of going back than I was of failing. By junior year, I had an internship at a supply chain startup in Atlanta. By senior year, I had an idea of my own, a small one, a specific one. I had noticed that mid-sized warehouses were hemorrhaging money on routing inefficiencies, and that most existing software was built for giants, Amazon, Walmart, companies with entire departments just to run the systems. Nobody had built anything lean enough for a family business to actually use. I built it in a shared workspace that smelled like burned coffee, working nights and weekends on a folding table, wedged between two other startups arguing about their logos. I made more mistakes than I could count. The company was called SwiftGrid Solutions, and for the first 2 years it was more aspiration than reality. And then a regional grocery chain in Tennessee tried it, and it worked, and they told 2 other chains, and those chains told 2 more, and by the time I was 29 I had 40 employees and a valuation that made me sit very still in a quiet room for a long time and just breathe. I called my mother that night. She said, "That's wonderful, honey, be careful." She didn't tell my father. I already knew he wouldn't understand, and I found, to my own surprise, that I no longer needed him to. I met my ex-husband at an industry conference in Denver when I was 30. He was clever and warm, and he laughed at the right things. He said he admired ambitious women. He said he wanted a partner, not someone to take care of. He said all the things that sound true when you're lonely enough to need them to be. We got married in Savannah in the early spring. My parents came. My father shook my husband's hand and told him he was a lucky man. He had never said anything like that to me in my entire life. For a while, it worked. Then SwiftGrid grew faster than he was prepared for. He started making small comments. "You didn't need to take that call, we were having dinner. Why do you always have to be the one in charge? Why can't you let someone else lead?" I shrank. I got smaller and quieter in my own marriage, the way I had gotten smaller and quieter in my childhood home, because I had been taught early that taking up too much space was the reason people left. He left anyway, with a woman from his office. He told me I had made him feel invisible for years. The word invisible went into me like a splinter. My entire life I had been made invisible by people who were supposed to love me, and he was using it as his excuse for what he'd done. I filed for divorce. I was 3 months pregnant. Stella was born on a Wednesday morning in May, during a thunderstorm. The nurse put her on my chest, and she made a small sound almost like a question, and I whispered into her hair, "You will never have to earn this, it's already yours." I raised her alone. I ran SwiftGrid through sleepless nights and nap-time work sessions and afternoons, where I sat in a parking lot and cried for 10 minutes and then walked back in and ran a board meeting. Every time I felt like I couldn't, I thought of her face and I thought, "Watch me." When SwiftGrid hit its first 10 million in annual revenue, I took myself to dinner at a restaurant with cloth napkins. Just me. I ordered a glass of wine and looked at the city through the window and thought, they were wrong about me. Every single one of them was wrong. My father lost his job the following winter. The insurance company restructured, and at 62 he found himself exactly where he had always told me I would end up, dispensable. My mother emailed me, not called, emailed. She said things were tight and they were managing fine. I sat with that email for a week. I didn't owe them anything. I knew that clearly and without guilt, but I also knew that I was not capable of letting people struggle when I had the means to help, not because they deserved it, but because I did. I didn't want to become someone hardened by old wounds. That felt like letting them change who I was, and they had already taken enough. I set up an LLC called Franklin Advisory, a name that meant nothing to anyone but me. I scheduled a monthly transfer of $6,000 into my parents' account, listed as consulting income. I told no one. Not even my assistant Kezia, who managed most of my finances and who would have raised exactly one eyebrow and said exactly nothing, waiting for me to come to my senses. Months passed. My mother called, lighter than she'd been in years. "Your father picked up some consulting work," she said. "We redid the kitchen. The backsplash alone was worth it." "Yes," I said, "I know." My brother texted me a photo of a new truck. "Got a great deal," he wrote. "Working hard pays off." I said congratulations, and I almost meant it, and I let them believe what they needed to believe. I watched their lives improve from a distance, and I told myself it was generosity. Sometimes, late at night, I admitted to myself it was something else too. A quiet need to be the thing holding them together even while they called me nothing. I am not proud of that, but it was true, and I think honesty matters more than flattering yourself. SwiftGrid hit 52 million in valuation on a Tuesday. Kezia sent me a champagne emoji and I stared at the number for a long time. Then I went to pick Stella up from school and she ran across the parking lot in her yellow rain boots, arms wide, and I thought, this is what I built it for. Not the number. This exact moment right here. My mother called in October. Her voice had that particular quality she gets when she's working hard to sound casual about something she isn't casual about at all. "We're doing a real Thanksgiving this year," she said. "Everyone together. It's been too long, and Stella should know her family. She should know where she comes from." I looked at Stella through the doorway. She was drawing at the kitchen table, tongue between her teeth, fully absorbed. She had asked me once about her grandparents. I said they loved us in their own way. She nodded with the solemn practicality that 5-year-olds have and went back to her drawing. "I'll think about it," I said. Kezia told me exactly what I expected her to tell me when I brought it up. She pressed her lips together and said, "You know what I think?" I said, "I know." She said, "Then why are you asking?" I said, "Because I need someone to talk me out of it." She didn't try. I booked the flights. I packed carefully chosen gifts. A good bourbon for my father, a silk scarf for my mother, art supplies for my nephew. I packed Stella's stuffed elephant and her favorite blanket and the dress she had chosen herself because, she explained to me very seriously, it made her look like a scientist. On the plane, she pressed her nose to the window and watched the clouds unroll below us and asked if Grandpa was funny. Sometimes, I said, which was not a lie exactly. The house looked different when the rental car turned onto their street. The new paint was visible, even in the gray November light. The deck, along the back, I could see from the driveway. The 2 cars I didn't recognize, and my brother's truck, sitting at the curb like a monument to his own version of himself. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked polished and slightly rehearsed, the way she always looks when she's working hard to hold something in place. "You made it," she said, and pulled me into a hug that was long enough to feel sincere, and not quite long enough to feel genuine. Stella waved at her with great formality. I walked into the house and stopped. He was standing by the fireplace with a glass of wine, talking to my brother. In my parents' living room, in the house I had been quietly funding for 3 years, my ex-husband in a gray tie, looking comfortable in a room he had never earned the right to stand in. The room seemed to tilt. I felt the blood behind my ears. I was very glad Stella was too short to see his face clearly over the back of the couch. My brother looked over. His expression was half guilty, half entertained, a combination I had seen on his face since we were children. My father came out of the kitchen. "You're here," he said, as though my arrival were a fact requiring confirmation. He looked at me, then at Stella, and nodded once, the nod he gives things that are adequate but not exceptional. "Dinner in 20, he said, and went back to the kitchen. I pulled my mother into the hallway. "Why is he here?" I said. Her face moved through several expressions quickly. "Your father thought." "Mom, why is he here?" "He thought it would be good for Stella. To have her father present. He reached out to your father, and your father." "Did not ask me," I said. "You would have said no." "Yes," I said, "I would have." "That's why he didn't ask." I stood there for a moment. Then I said, "Fine," and I walked back into the room, and I sat down at a table in a house I had paid for, across from a man I had divorced, and I told myself I could survive one dinner. Dinner was all surface, silverware and performance and careful sentences. My ex-husband spoke to everyone except Stella and me, which was the correct choice and the only one he made all evening that I respected. My sister-in-law asked me 3 separate times how I was managing everything on my own, in the tone of someone gathering evidence. My brother made a comment about tech being a bubble. My father carved the turkey and talked about the economy and said young women needed contingency plans. I ate. I kept my voice level. I watched the candlelight on the china and thought, I paid for that renovation. I funded this comfort. I am sitting in a house that would not exist in this form without me, being advised to have a backup plan. Then Stella reached for her water glass and knocked it over. It was a small spill, a child's accident, the kind that happens at every table where a child is present. My father's hand came down flat on the table, not a slap but deliberate. The sound cracked through the room. "For heaven's sake," he said. Stella's face crumpled. She looked at me and I watched her decide very bravely not to cry. My ex-husband made a small sound, almost a laugh. He said, "She takes after her mother." I put my napkin on the table. I want to be precise about what happened next. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 32 years in rooms where men spoke over me, and I had learned something in all of that a quiet voice in the right moment carries further than anything you could shout. "I need to say something," I said. The table went still. "The LLC that's been depositing money into your account every month for the past 3 years. Franklin Advisory." I looked at my father. "That's me." "The kitchen, the deck, the water heater you replaced in January." I looked at my brother. "The down payment on your truck." My brother's face went very blank. "I did it because you needed help and I had the means. I didn't do it to hold over you. But you should know who you've been accepting it from. You should know who you've been calling a backup plan kind of person while you spent her money." I turned to look at my ex-husband. "And you should leave now." He looked at my father. My father said nothing. I helped Stella into her coat. "My mother," said Hannah, "please." My brother started to say something and stopped. My father sat at the head of the table with his hands flat in front of him and did not look at me. At the front door I turned back once. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. "I hope it's everything you wanted." Outside the cold was clean and sharp. Stella took my hand. "Did you do something brave, Mommy?" she asked. "I think so," I said. Your voice was shaking. "Yes," I said. "Brave things usually feel that way." We stayed at a hotel that night. Stella slept the way she always sleeps, completely, deeply, her arms wrapped around her elephant. I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. I looked at the scheduled transfers, $6,000 a month, 3 years. I looked at Stella's sleeping face. I clicked cancel on the first one, confirmed, then the next, confirmed, one by one until the screen read no active transfers, and the room was very quiet and I sat back in the chair and breathed. In the morning I called Kezia. "We're going home," I said. "Good," she said. "Cancel the Franklin Advisory transfers, all of them, permanently." A pause, "Then you finally did it?" "Yes." "Good," she said again, and I could hear in her voice that she had been waiting a long time to say it without me asking. The calls came within 2 days, my mother first, then my brother, then a block number I answered once, and my father was on the other end, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it in my life. He said he didn't realize how much the payments had covered. I said, "Now you do." He said, "Your brother may have to sell the truck." I said, "I know." A long silence, then, "I don't know how to apologize to you." I said, "I know that too, take the time to figure it out." I hung up. I sat by the window of my apartment in Atlanta and looked at the city below and felt something lift from my shoulders that I hadn't fully recognized until it was gone. Not satisfaction, not triumph. More like the feeling of finally setting down a bag you've carried so long, you forgot it wasn't part of your body. SwiftGrid kept growing. Kezia hired 2 new engineers. I spoke at a conference on logistics technology and women in the field, and afterward a woman in the front row came up to me and said, "You said exactly what I needed to hear." I thanked her and thought of Mrs. Dupree staying late in the computer lab to write a recommendation for a girl that no one else was bothering to see. I started a scholarship fund in Mrs. Dupree's name, 2 girls a year from rural Ohio going into STEM, fully funded. I didn't announce it, I just did it. Several months later, a letter came from my father. Handwritten, which surprised me. I hadn't known he still wrote by hand. He said that after a health scare that had scared him more than he wanted to admit, he had done a great deal of thinking. He said he didn't believe he had been a fair father to me, specifically. He said he was sorry. He said he understood if that wasn't enough. He was right that it wasn't enough. But it was the first honest thing he had said to me in 32 years. And honesty from someone who has never offered it before costs them something real. I didn't dismiss the cost just because I couldn't accept the apology yet. I wrote back one sentence, "I hope you're feeling stronger, take care of yourself." I meant it. I was surprised, genuinely surprised, to find that I meant it. The following November I cooked Thanksgiving myself. Kezia came with her wife and their new baby. My neighbor June, a retired schoolteacher with excellent opinions about pie, brought 2. My friend Odile, whom I'd met at the conference, came with her teenage daughter and a very good bottle of wine. Stella set the table herself with the good placemats and placed a small drawing at every seat because, she informed me with great authority, that is what hosts do. The apartment smelled like rosemary and butter. There was a candle in the window. Outside, Atlanta was doing what cities do, noisy and fast and entirely indifferent to everything except its own motion. Inside, it was warm. After dinner, Stella climbed into my lap, heavy with food and tired, and pressed her face against my shoulder. "Mommy," she said. "Yes. Is this what family feels like?" I looked around the room. Kezia laughing at something her wife had said. June cutting herself a second slice without asking permission. Odile's daughter quietly feeding crackers to the baby. The small drawing Stella had made for my place at the table. Two figures holding hands, one taller than the other, both with enormous round heads and stick arms raised straight above them, like they were winning something. "Yes," I said, "this is exactly what it feels like." She closed her eyes and was asleep in minutes, warm and entirely certain she was loved. The candle burned in the window. Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning, small and tentative, the kind that doesn't stick yet but means to. I sat still and felt her weight in my arms and the warmth at my back and the quiet simple fact of what I had built. Not the company, not the valuation, this table, these people, this life that fit me exactly the way I actually was, without apology, without conditions, without anyone deciding in advance what I was allowed to become. The girl who had spent a childhood disappearing had finally, in the most complete sense, come home.